Today we're going to be talking about demand elasticity. So first thing we need to do is define demand elasticity. It is a measure of how consumers react to a change in price. This is a way to measure a change in demand. So if a price changes just slightly, how much do you think that would affect how consumers demand or how much of that product they want? And that's basically what we're looking at today. So what determines elasticity? There are a couple things we have to consider. One is, do you need the product? If you don't need a product and the price changes just a little bit, you can put it off. And so that would change the demand quite a bit if all consumers had that same mentality. On the other hand, if you do need the product, it's unavoidable. You have to purchase it anyway. So that would make it less elastic, meaning the demand would not change very much, even if the price did change. The second thing we need to consider, are there alternatives or substitutes of the product? If there's an alternative, you could just go and buy that instead, which would have an impact on the demand of the product. However, if it is the only thing and there's nothing like it, then again, kind of like a need, you have no other option but to pay for it. And then finally, does your income allow you to make the purchase right now, or can you put it off or delay it? And so looking at your income, deciding if it's something you have to do right now versus delaying it can also influence demand. If you have to have it now, then that kind of fits back in with that need, and therefore your demand wouldn't change much. But if you can delay it and put it off for later, if a price changes on a product, multiple consumers are going to say, well, I don't need that right now, and therefore able to put it off, and that would have an impact on demand. All right, so the first type of elasticity we're going to talk about is elastic demand. So if you think about something elastic, typically you think about something that is stretchy or changes easily. So in this case, a small change in price causes a large change in the amount of a good demanded. So for example, if you had a cup of coffee, you might say that, let's say the price of a cup of coffee goes up $2, and that might not seem like very much, but suddenly people are looking at other alternatives. What are some other things they can consume to get that same caffeine? Items that are not necessities, can be delayed, and or have substitutes are considered elastic. And the reason I've highlighted the letter E here is because when I think of elasticity, the more horizontal your line is, the more elastic the good is. So in this case, you have 3 horizontal lines in the E, and that reminds me that this, in fact, is elastic. Okay, and I'll show you an example in just a moment. The example your textbook gives says T-bone steaks are normally $5.50, but go on sale for $3.75. T-bone steaks are not a necessity, they're affordable, and there are other cuts of beef you can buy, so it is elastic. People will rush out to stores to buy T-bone steaks, increasing demand because they see this price change, and therefore they might go and stock up now, put some in their freezer, or maybe that's what they plan to eat while watching a football game or something like that, and it would definitely have an impact on demand. Now let's say that the price was $3.75 and now goes up to $5.50, we would see a big change in demand because suddenly people are like, I can go get a different cut of meat. I don't have to have a T-bone steak. There are other options here as well, making that product more elastic. So like I was saying before, if you are just simply looking at a graph showing demand, you will notice that if it is elastic, generally it has more of this flattened or horizontal slope to it rather than a steep slope, which we'll talk about in a minute. And in this case, you can see a small change in price results in a large change in quantity demanded. So let's say, for example, that right here was our T-bone steak at $5.50. Okay. And then we change that and we say, okay, no longer is it $5.50. Now we are going to make it $3.75. So we move down here. We'll notice that 550 may have been here in the quantity demanded, but now if we're here for 350, suddenly we have quite a substantial increase in demand to there. Okay, and I'll give you a few more examples in a moment. Inelastic demand is the opposite. This is a small change in price causes a small change in demand. And these are typically going to be your products that have no substitutes, and they are necessities, and they're generally purchased in a limited amount. Generally, you may not need a whole bunch of it at one time. So the example your textbook gives is salt. Salt is inelastic because people only eat a limited amount of salt at a time. At least we hope so. Salt is not necessarily a necessity, and there might be a few other substitutes for it, but in general, you're not going to buy salt every time you go to the grocery store. You might buy salt maybe every couple of months, depending on how much salt your family uses. But because it is limited on how frequently you purchase it, that's what makes it inelastic. All right. And so comparatively speaking, if we look at an inelastic graph compared to an elastic graph, you will automatically notice that we went from having a very horizontal shaped slope to now having much more vertical slope. And here again, I highlighted this I because the more that this line looks vertical, chances are the more inelastic that product is. And so here again, a small change in price results in a small change in quantity demanded. So if we had, let's say, water, okay, so like the water you have coming to your home, let's say the price of water is here, and it is, we'll move it down here. Let's say the price of water is 50 cents a gallon, okay? If suddenly they decide that they're going to increase their rates at Birmingham Waterworks from 50 cents a gallon to $1 a gallon. Okay, so here we were at 50 cents in our quantity demanded, and now we're jumping to $1 quantity demanded. There's not going to be a whole lot of change there because people have to have water and they have to drink water, and that is a necessity, and there's no alternative for it. So that's what makes it inelastic. It's not very flexible. It's not very stretchy. A change in price is not really going to impact how much consumers demand of that product. So here's an example. Is butter elastic or inelastic? And looking at the example, you have to ask yourself the three questions. Is it a necessity? Does it have a substitute? And can you delay purchasing this item? Well, right off the bat, the second question, I know there's a substitute for butter. A substitute for butter is margarine. So that would make butter elastic automatically, okay? Because if the price of butter increases, I may not like margarine quite as much, but it is considered a substitute, and I could buy margarine instead. Water, we've already talked about this, okay? So, water is inelastic. It is a necessity. There is no other substitute, and generally you cannot delay buying it. So if the price of water changes, even just a little bit, it's not going to change much in demand. If price changes a whole lot, it's still not going to change demand much because people have to have it. It's not flexible. Change in price does not cause a big change in demand. And then finally, we have this third one that's called unit elastic. This is where price and demand change at the same rate. Profit and revenue the store makes also stays the same. It's kind of a one-to-one ratio. So as one decreases, the other will increase. So if price here decreases, the quantity demanded will increase at the same rate that your price decreased. And we'll talk more about that as well and how to identify that. So now we have to talk about this equation. Take a minute to jot this equation down as I'm talking about it. So in order to calculate demand elasticity, you have to use this equation. The first thing you need to do is find your percentage change for demand and then find your percentage change for price. So if you're talking about finding your percentage change for demand, you have to look at what was your original amount demanded. Subtract your new amount demanded, divide by your original number demanded. take the number that you get. If it is a decimal point, you need to convert it into a percentage, so you would move that decimal point to the right 2 times. And if you have a negative number, you need to get rid of the negative number, okay? And you would take this number and you would put it up here. Same thing for price. You're going to take your original price, subtract your new price, put it over your original price. And when you get a decimal, move the decimal to the right twice. If it is a negative number, get rid of the negative. So it should just be a percent, and you're going to put that here. Then you're going to divide your percent change in quantity demanded over your percent change in price, and that will equal your elasticity. If this number equals 1, it is unit elastic, meaning that you are changing at a 1-to-1 ratio. If the number is less than 1, it is inelastic, meaning change in price is not going to cause much of a change in demand. But if your number is greater than 1, it is considered elastic. A change in price will cause a change in demand, and pretty substantial change in demand. And we'll do a couple practice equations on this in just a moment.